The shimmering expanse of the starfield stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, its beauty stark against the dimly lit interior of the Asterion. Commander Cale Varen leaned against the console, his gaze fixed on the blinking proximity alert. It wasn't a typical anomaly. The ship's sensors were struggling to classify it, spitting out conflicting data. "Still staring at it like it'll explain itself, Cale?" Elora teased from the co-pilot seat. Her sharp features softened by the faint glow of the instrument panel, she tapped the controls with practiced ease. "It's not every day you find a signal in dead space," Cale replied, his voice low, contemplative. Dead space, a term used for the vast regions of the galaxy where neither stars nor civilizations thrived. For most, it was a void to avoid, an expanse where only wreckage and whispers of lost ships remained. But the signal wasn't debris. It pulsed with an eerie rhythm, its cadence almost purposeful. Elora leaned back, arms crossed. "Well, we're not treasure hunters. We were supposed to rendezvous with the fleet yesterday." Cale ran a hand through his dark hair. "Command can wait. Whatever this is, it's old. Older than anything on the charts. If there's even a chance it's linked to the Catalyst Wars." Elora sighed. "You and your ancient obsessions. Fine. Let's see what death trap you've dragged us into this time." The Asterion drifted closer to the signal's source, guided by Cale's steady hand. As they approached, the object came into view, a massive structure, its surface black as onyx and veined with glowing lines of faintly pulsating blue. It wasn't a ship or a station but something older, carved with runes that defied translation. Elora whistled low. "Okay, I'll admit, that's impressive. Creepy, but impressive." Cale adjusted the ship's scanners. "This isn't natural. It's a construct. Pre-Dominion, maybe pre-humanity." Elora rolled her eyes. "Sure. Let's poke it. What's the worst that could happen?" Her sarcasm faded when the ship's comms crackled to life, broadcasting an unintelligible burst of static interspersed with fragments of a voice. Cale froze, his fingers hovering over the controls. "Is that speaking?" Elora asked, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. Cale nodded, leaning closer. "It's repeating something. But the language... I don't recognize it." Suddenly, the ship shuddered. A beam of light erupted from the structure, striking the Asterion. The vessel groaned as its systems surged, alarms blaring. "Shields failing!" Elora shouted, gripping the console. "Whatever that thing is, it's hacking us." Cale slammed a series of commands into the interface, rerouting power. "Divert all systems to containment. We're not losing the ship." The light subsided as abruptly as it had begun, leaving the Asterion eerily quiet. Cale's chest heaved as he checked the readouts. "Status?" he asked, his voice strained. Elora scowled at the displays. "We're alive barely. But that thing, it did something to the power core. It's destabilizing." Cale's blood ran cold. A ship's core failure was a death sentence in deep space. He glanced back at the structure on the screen, its pulsing light now slower, almost inviting. "It's trying to pull us in," he said, realization dawning. Elora gave him a sharp look. "What? You think it's alive?" "Not alive," Cale said. "But sentient, maybe. It didn't destroy us outright. It wants something." Before Elora could respond, the comms crackled again. This time, the voice was clearer, the words haunting in their simplicity. "Enter. Claim the power. Or perish." Elora stared at the screen, her usual sarcasm replaced by genuine concern. "You don't seriously think we should go in there, do you?" Cale hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "If we don't, we die out here anyway. At least this way, we might learn something." Elora groaned. "I hate when you're right." The Asterion adjusted its trajectory, its battered hull groaning in protest as it neared the ancient construct. Cale's fingers hovered over the controls, his pulse racing. Whatever lay ahead, it wasn't just survival, it was history, mystery, and danger wrapped into one. And it was calling him. The Asterion edged closer to the ancient structure, its lights cutting through the thick veil of shadow surrounding the monolithic construct. The runes etched into its surface glowed faintly, their pulsing rhythm like a heartbeat. Kale and Elora exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. "You know," Elora said, her tone forced light, "we could just turn around, pretend we never found this thing, and live to tell the tale. Or, live at all." Kale tightened his grip on the controls. "You heard it. It's not giving us a choice." Elora sighed, her fingers dancing across the console to scan the interior of the structure as the ship aligned with a massive opening. It resembled a maw, dark and foreboding, surrounded by faintly glowing glyphs. The interior was pitch black, the sensors struggling to penetrate the void. As the Asterian passed through the entrance, a wave of energy surged through the ship. The lights flickered, and a low hum resonated through the hull. Kale winced as the noise reverberated in his chest. "Systems are stable," Elora reported, her voice taut. "But this place, it's doing something to the instruments. And to me. Feels like the air's heavier." Kale nodded. He felt it too, a pressure, not physical but psychological, like an unseen force pressing into his mind. The ship came to a halt in a massive chamber. The walls were smooth and black, illuminated by veins of blue light that spiraled toward the center, where a massive, hovering artifact pulsated. It was crystalline and intricate, its facets shifting as if alive. "That's the core," Kale whispered. Elora squinted. "Core of what?" "This thing's not a ship. It's more like a temple." A sudden burst of light erupted from the artifact, enveloping the cockpit. Both Kale and Elora shielded their eyes. When the light subsided, they found themselves elsewhere. The Asterian was gone. They stood on solid ground, a shimmering, endless expanse stretching out around them. The sky was a swirling canvas of colors, and the air hummed with a strange energy. "Where are we?" Elora asked, her voice shaking. Kale turned, his boots crunching against the ground that looked like glass but felt like stone. "Inside the construct, maybe. Or somewhere else entirely." A figure emerged from the shimmering haze ahead. It was humanoid but translucent, its body composed of shifting light. Its eyes burned with an intense, unearthly glow. "Travelers," the figure said, its voice resonating in their minds more than their ears. "You seek the power of the ancients." Kale stepped forward cautiously. "We didn't come here to take anything. Our ship. Your presence is enough." The figure interrupted, its tone neither hostile nor welcoming. "To step within is to partake in the trial. Only the worthy may leave." "Trial?" Elora asked, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm, though she found none. The figure raised an arm, and the shimmering landscape shifted. The ground cracked, and jagged obsidian towers erupted around them. The sky darkened, and a cacophony of voices echoed, whispering incomprehensible words. "Prove yourselves," the figure said, "or be consumed." Before they could respond, the ground beneath them shifted violently. They were separated by a chasm that split the surface, leaving Kale on one side and Elora on the other. "Kale!" Elora shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the roaring wind. Kale turned to face the towering structure that had risen before him. It pulsed with energy, and tendrils of light began to snake toward him. On the opposite side, Elora faced a different trial, a maze of shifting mirrors that reflected not her image but moments from her past. Each step she took sent ripples through the memories, forcing her to confront old fears and regrets. Kale, meanwhile, fought to keep his footing as the tendrils of light lashed at him. He dodged, his instincts honed from years of service guiding him. But it wasn't enough. One of the tendrils struck, sending a surge of energy through him. For a moment, his mind wasn't his own. He saw flashes of battles he never fought, planets he never visited, and a vast war that stretched across millennia. When he regained control, the figure's voice echoed in his mind. "Your kind is both fragile and resilient. Show me which you are." Kale growled, forcing himself to his feet. He reached for the center of the structure, his determination outweighing the pain. Elora, too, pushed forward, her reflection urging her to stop. But she ignored it, her focus sharpening with every step. The two pressed on, their trials pushing them to their limits. Neither knew what awaited them at the end, but they both understood one thing: they had to survive, for each other and for the truth of the construct's power. Kale gritted his teeth, the tendrils of light growing more aggressive as he advanced toward the pulsating core at the heart of his trial. Each strike burned with an intensity that seared into his very soul, but he forced himself to move forward. He was no stranger to pain, but this was different. This wasn't just physical. It probed his mind, his memories, forcing him to relive moments of weakness and doubt. A tendril wrapped around his arm, and in an instant, he was back on Aerith Prime, the battlefield where he'd lost his squad. The scene was vivid, his comrades' voices, their final cries, the deafening roar of explosions. The weight of his failure threatened to crush him all over again. "No!" Kale growled, shaking his head violently. "That's not who I am anymore." The tendril faltered, and the vision shattered like glass. The voice of the construct resonated in his mind. "You carry your wounds like a banner, but you do not let them define you." Interesting. Kale ignored the words, focusing on the core. With every step, the tendrils weakened, their strikes less precise. The closer he got, the more he felt control returning to him. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the chasm, Elora faced her own trial. The maze of mirrors continued to shift, each reflection showing her moments she'd buried deep. The time she'd betrayed a friend for a promotion. The time she abandoned a cause she believed in because it was too dangerous. The time she failed to act, and it cost innocent lives. Her reflection spoke, its voice dripping with disdain. "You always run. It's what you're best at." Elora clenched her fists. "Maybe I have run before. Maybe I've been a coward. But not today!" She lashed out, shattering the mirror before her. The shards dissolved into light, and the maze shifted, opening a path forward. With every step, she faced another memory, another failure, but she refused to stop. The maze began to collapse behind her, the reflective walls melting into liquid light. The construct's voice echoed in her ears. "You acknowledge your failures, yet you do not let them bind you. You move forward." Intriguing. Elora pressed on, her eyes fixed on the end of the path where a small, glowing orb hovered. At the same moment, Kale reached the core of his trial. The pulsating artifact loomed before him, its surface alive with shifting symbols. As he extended his hand, the tendrils retreated entirely, as if recognizing his resolve. The construct's voice filled the air around him. "You possess strength forged in loss and tempered by purpose. You are ready." Kale grabbed the artifact, and a surge of energy shot through him. He cried out, but instead of pain, he felt clarity. Visions flooded his mind, glimpses of the ancient war, the creation of the construct, and the prophecy tied to its power. On the other side, Elora reached the glowing orb. As she touched it, the maze disappeared, replaced by a vast void. She was alone, but she felt Kale's presence in the distance, as if their trials were converging. The construct appeared before both of them, its luminous figure splitting into two identical forms. "You have both passed the trials," it said, its voice echoing in harmony. "You are stronger together than apart. The power you seek is not merely a weapon but a choice, a catalyst to reshape your future." Kale and Elora were suddenly back in the same space, standing before the construct's central core. The energy between them hummed with potential, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. "What's the catch?" Elora asked, narrowing her eyes. The construct's light dimmed slightly, as if in acknowledgement. "The power to end all wars is also the power to end everything. It cannot distinguish between good and evil. It only amplifies the wielder's intent. Choose wisely." Kale glanced at Elora, his voice steady. "We came here for answers, not destruction. If this power is a danger to everyone, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands." Elora nodded, her determination matching his. "We'll protect it. Together." The construct's light flared, and the artifact in Kale's hand reshaped itself into a crystalline key. "Then take this," the construct said. Guard it well, for others will come seeking what you have found. And remember, the greatest power lies not in destruction but in restraint. As the chamber around them began to collapse, Kale and Elora sprinted back toward their ship, the key clutched tightly in Kale's hand. The Asterion was waiting, its systems miraculously restored. They barely made it aboard before the construct sealed itself, vanishing into the void as if it had never been. Panting, Elora collapsed into her chair. "Well," she said with a shaky laugh, "I'd say we earned a drink after that." Kale chuckled, though his gaze lingered on the key. "Yeah. But something tells me this is just the beginning." The Asterion shot into the stars, leaving the construct, and its secrets, behind. The stars stretched before them as the Asterion sailed deeper into the galaxy, Kale's hands gripping the crystalline key tightly, its smooth surface cool against his skin. The silence in the cockpit was thick, an unspoken weight between him and Elora as they navigated their course through the vastness of space. Even the hum of the ship seemed subdued, as if the Asterion too understood the enormity of what they carried. "You know," Elora began, breaking the silence, her voice low and thoughtful. "It's strange to think about the fact that something so small could change everything. A key to endless war or peace. It feels too simple." Kale didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure how to voice the swirling storm inside him. The construct's words echoed in his mind, the greatest power lies not in destruction but in restraint star. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? The true test wasn't in wielding power, but in knowing when and how not to. Kale had seen what happened to those who were consumed by ambition and rage. He had been one of them, once. Now, he understood how easy it could be to lose oneself to a cause that burned too brightly. "Sometimes the simple things are the most dangerous," Kale finally said. "The key isn't just a weapon, it's a choice. A choice we have to make every single day." Elora nodded. "Yeah, but it's not just up to us. There are people out there who will come after this, who will want to use it, no matter the cost. We need to stay ahead of them, keep it safe." "I agree," Kale said. "But that doesn't mean we have to carry the burden alone." He looked out of the viewport, watching the stars blur as the ship accelerated. "The only thing we can do is make sure this doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Elora's eyes met his, and for a brief moment Kale saw something flicker in them. Determination, maybe, or the weariness that came with knowing just how heavy their task was. It had been a long journey, and they both knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. "Do you think we made the right choice?" Elora asked quietly, as if uncertain. "Taking the key instead of destroying it. What if we've just unleashed something worse?" Kale exhaled sharply, rubbing his hand over his face. He'd asked himself the same question a dozen times. Was the temptation to wield such power just too great? Was their decision one of necessity, or were they simply acting out of fear of what might happen if they let the key slip away? It was an easy trap to fall into, thinking that by taking control, they could guarantee peace. But peace was never guaranteed. Not when so many others would do anything to seize it for themselves. "I don't know," Kale admitted. "But I do know that if we give up now, we'll never find out if we were right." His voice hardened with conviction. "And if we fail, at least we know we tried." The ship's console beeped, a faint signal from deep space indicating a transmission. Kale glanced at Elora, who was already scanning the data. Her fingers moved over the controls, activating the comms system. A hologram materialized before them, an image of a high-ranking officer, dressed in the uniform of the Intergalactic Coalition. "Captain Kale, Elora," the officer greeted, his voice sharp with urgency. "You've been gone for too long. We've been monitoring the situation. It's time to bring the key back to us." Kale's grip on the key tightened. The familiar face of the officer was both a relief and a warning. The Coalition had always been a force for order in the galaxy, but Kale knew better than to trust them implicitly. The power that the key represented could shift the balance of the entire galaxy, and while the officer spoke of order, Kale suspected the true agenda was something darker. "We've retrieved it," Kale said, his tone measured. "But we'll need more information about who exactly you represent." The key doesn't belong to anyone but those who are worthy to wield it. The officer's eyes narrowed, but he quickly regained his composure. The coalition needs the key for the greater good, Captain. You've seen the dangers yourself. There are enemies out there who would use this power to destroy everything we've built. We can't allow it to fall into their hands. Cale's heart raced, his instincts screaming. They hadn't come this far to let the coalition control the key. Not when they didn't fully understand what it was capable of. He looked over at Elora, her expression as unreadable as ever. She had her own reservations about the coalition, and now more than ever, it was clear they couldn't trust anyone completely. I'm afraid we can't do that, Cale said firmly. We'll be keeping the key until we determine the safest course of action. If you want it, you'll have to come and take it. The officer's image flickered, a sign that the transmission was ending. His voice, low and cold, was the last thing Cale heard. You've made a mistake, Captain. You'll regret this. The comms went silent, leaving only the hum of the ship's engines in the background. Elora exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. You know what this means, right? She said. The coalition isn't going to let this go. They'll come after us. And they'll come hard. Cale nodded, his jaw tightening. We'll be ready for them. We've been through worse. The ship continued to speed through the stars, and though the uncertainty of their future weighed heavily on them, Cale felt something shift inside him. They weren't just holding a weapon. They were holding a choice, one that would define the future of the galaxy. And that choice would be theirs to make. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the challenges they faced would be formidable. But Cale knew one thing for sure: they weren't alone. Together, they would carry the key, and together, they would determine its fate. And no matter what happened, they would never stop fighting for what was right. As the stars stretched on, Cale and Elora prepared for the battles to come. The fate of the galaxy was in their hands, and they would not let it slip away.